Sonny Dykes adds a TCU legend to the coaching staff, and I like the move.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 seasons. Thanks for joining us today. It is a Monday, brand new week. We're going to get to the Hoops weekend later on in the show. TCU women, they beat Texas Tech. The men, they got just trounced by Iowa State on the road after a college game day was there. But Frogs lose by 30. The men did in Ames. And Amontre Harris, a recent commit, actually decommitted. So we'll get into that later on in the show. But today, I want to talk about another addition to the coaching staff. So on Friday, I spent most of the first segment discussing Randy Clements, who is a very experienced offensive line coach, has been all over the place through the years, but has been with Kendall Briles during multiple stops and has been doing this for almost 40 years. He is going to join the coaching staff as an assistant offensive line coach. He's going to help out A.J. Ricker at that position group, which I really like the move. I think it's great for a number of reasons, the main one being this O-line, this run game needs help, and so you bring Randy on to accomplish that. Another move that I wouldn't say it went under the radar because TCU announced it, and it's a really cool, from a sentimental standpoint, it's a great move. I also think it's going to be good for the football program, but this is definitely a name that people hear it and they get excited. Aaron Green, former TCU running back, he is joining the staff as assistant director of player personnel. So these player personnel departments have become a lot more popular over the past decade and really over the past 5 years of college football. And there's kind of two wings to it. There's the scouting aspect of it, where you're constantly evaluating guys in the portal, high school players, what do our numbers look like next year? How many people could we add? What types of players do we want to run the system? And then there's the other side of it that, it sort of dovetails in with that because it's very recruiting heavy. But it's more on the aspect of when we have visits, when we have big events, how are we going to connect with these kids? How can we make sure these kids know that we care about them, that we are paying attention to what they're doing, that we think they'd be a great fit at TCU? So how can we communicate that with them, whether they're on campus or they're not? Aaron Green has been an assistant running backs coach at UTSA for the past few seasons. He's from San Antonio originally. And now he's coming up to Fort Worth to coach his alma mater and reunite with people here and be with Sonny Dykes. So I think this is awesome for a number of reasons. First off, he gave us one of the iconic moments in TCU history. I'll show a picture of it if you're watching on YouTube. I think you know what I'm gonna say here. I couldn't find a great shot of him holding the ball in the end zone after he caught it, but here's after Josh Doxson tipped the ball up in the air on 4th and goal. Looks like the Frogs are going to lose. Aaron Green runs underneath it, catches it, somehow gets his feet in bounds, and they beat Patrick Mahomes and Texas Tech on the road in 2015. It was definitely one of those where were you types of moments when it comes to TCU football, especially when we're talking about specifically regular season games. He was also a huge part of what they did in 2014. A lot of memories there, but the main one that stands out to me was his game against Kansas State. TCU did a blackout that night. Frogs won big against a ranked K-State team, and he had a cutback run in the second half of that ball game that was just bonkers, and the crowd went crazy. And he was a huge part of what they did. I think at times Aaron kind of got lost with the star that Josh Doxson was and the star that Trayvon Boykin was, but he made that running game go. He was a fantastic part of that team, and they don't have all the success that they had without him there, especially considering, B.J. Catalon unfortunately had multiple concussions, and so he started the year in 2014 as the main guy, and then because of his injuries, he was out of it, and Aaron had to take on more of the load from a carry perspective, and he did that really well. So he's coming back to TCU. He's going to be on staff. He understands what it means to be a Frog. When it comes to making a pitch to these guys in the recruiting world, he'll have a great perspective on it. He will have a great understanding of what it means to be recruited, even though it's changed a lot with NIL and everything else. He's not that far removed from that process himself. He got to learn under a great coach in Jeff Traylor at UTSA, who's one of the hottest names in the country when we talk about a dude that could make the jump soon to a Power 5 school, and his name still comes up in just about every opening that's out there. I think another important aspect of this, I did a show a few weeks ago. Gary Patterson spoke with Matt Mosley on the radio, and he said he was interested. He ultimately said one day he's going to be back at TCU. But at the time, he was like, yeah, I'm interested in coming back in some capacity. I'm interested in still being in the coaching game. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I feel like I have something to prove. And Sonny took over. And honestly, when he got the job, there was still a pretty heavy influence of, I guess, Gary's perspective on things within the program. Because Malcolm Kelly stuck around. Doug Meacham stuck around. Paul Gonzalez was there, right? Well, slowly, pretty much all of those guys have been phased out. Or not phased out. They've left on their own accord. Doug Meacham got an opportunity at Oklahoma State to be an OC, be a play caller. He's going to take that. Paul Gonzalez got a chance to move on down the road to Baylor and I assume get a pay raise along with a new title in pass game coordinator. And so he jumped at that opportunity. So now it's really just Malcolm Kelly. And if you're not going to get GP on staff anytime soon, which I don't think there's no indication that's going to happen in the near future. I think that's down the road as time continues to heal things, right? That'll happen years from now. But I do think he was such an important part of what they did. And having somebody on staff who understands the toughness, the attitude, the chip on the shoulder type of mentality that he brought to the table is good. It's good for the program itself. I think it's good for the movers and shakers and the donors that are pouring money into NIL and facilities to see, okay, that's a familiar face, right? That's somebody I know. That's somebody who was part of the glory days of TCU football under Gary Patterson and knows what it means to be a frog. So it's not just a sentimental hire, but I think there is a cool aspect of Aaron knowing what was so important to TCU fans at that time and knowing who Gary is and understanding the type of mentality he brought to the table, that's a small part of what they're doing now and that his influence is still somewhat within the program. That being said, he's his own person. He's learning the coaching game himself. I'm sure he's taken a little bit from everybody that he's played under. He spent some time in Nebraska. He spent some time at UTSA. So he's doing his own thing. I just think it's nice that he has that connection to the previous regime. So assistant director of player personnel, my guess is he's going to be exclusively on the recruiting side of things. But I also think it's good. I mean, Jimmy Smith is going to do the job, and he's going to do it well. But I think it's nice to have, for these running backs that are there right now, Nate Palmer, Trent Battle, Jeremy Payne, John Denman coming in. It's good to have somebody there who they can talk to, who knows what it's like to play that position, who understands what it's like to play that position here, and has experience excelling at a high level at the running back spot. It can't hurt to have an extra set of eyes and just kind of a sounding board to run over and say, hey, what are you seeing week to week during these games that I can improve on, that I can do better, that we can build on moving forward? And it's also just awesome to have him here because, I mean, he was such a huge part of that run in 2014 and 2015, which, at least for me personally, being a student at the time, was a huge part of my TCU fandom. And I know a lot of people that listen and watch this pod. So Aaron Green joining the coaching staff, assistant director of player personnel. Nice to have him back here in Fort Worth. I think it's a good move by Sonny Dykes to get him on staff and get his perspective on things. When we come back, TCU men's and women's basketball, how did they fare this weekend? We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. First, a mention of one of our great sponsors, FanDuel, FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. And you might say to yourself, hey, the Super Bowl is over. Yes, it is. Eagles rout the Chiefs last night, but still plenty of action to get in on FanDuel. The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip or you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. It makes every moment of the game exciting. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your $5 bet wins. Your first $5 bet, if it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. Just go to FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So TCU men's and women's basketball both played on Saturday. The men took on Iowa State in Ames, and they fell by a final score of 82-52. Frogs, unfortunately, a common thing, struggled to shoot the ball, shot 14% from three, 35% from the field, 60% from the line. And, I mean, your leading scorer was Noah Reynolds and Trezarian White. Both guys had 9 points. Just a tough day for everybody. Curtis Jones on the other side for Iowa State had a big night. I'm not going to make an excuse for this loss. I thought this was a really tough matchup coming in. One, because Iowa State just makes life tough on TCU. They have the last few seasons with the way they play defense, relentless effort, a lot of pressure. That has not gelled well with recent TCU teams, along with the fact that College Game Day was in town, already a good crowd, became a more raucous environment, and the Cyclones lost 2 straight. They played on Big Monday against Kansas, lost that game. They had about 5 days to get their minds right, prepare, get motivated to take on TCU. Not your recipe for success. That being said, this is another embarrassing loss, albeit to a top 10 ranked team, and a team that was in the top 5 until a couple of recent losses. The other one was to UCF, which was inexcusable, also on the road. They play Oklahoma State on Wednesday, which Cowboys, first-year head coach, they're kind of working through some things, but they've looked better as of late. My big picture takeaway from this game, or what I want to talk about today, you're 2 games under 500 in Big 12 play. I think best-case scenario, this team makes the NIT. I feel like there's enough wins left on the schedule to do that, which could be beneficial for them in that they're a young group and it gives them more opportunities to play together, to grow together. David Punch has been fantastic. I like what I've seen from Micah Robinson. At times I would like to see more of him on the floor. Other than that, it's been kind of inconsistent with your other young players. There's always sort of questions swirling about Jamie Dixon. What's his future look like? How much longer does TCU want to continue down this path? So I think when we talk about those things, there's 2 aspects of it. There is what we as fans want to happen, and then what is actually going on, the reality of the situation. Because back in the middle of this football season, a lot of you wanted me to come out and say, hey, Sonny Dykes needs to be let go, right? Which, after the Houston game, somebody asked me point blank, if you made the decision, what would you do? And at the time I said, yeah, I think they need to move on, because I felt like their ceiling the rest of the year was going to be finishing with like 5 or 6 wins, most likely 5 wins. And they ended up turning things around, and now I don't believe that, right? I think Sonny's going to be the guy for the next few seasons, and I like the direction that they're moving in. But when it comes to basketball, TCU's not making a move after this year. I'll just tell you that. I don't believe that's going to happen. I do think, personally, going to 3 tournaments in a row and winning in the first round in 2 of those, and people can kind of scoff at that or say, that's not as hard as you're making it out to be. When we look at the history of TCU basketball, it is. And I do feel like you have to look at his job performance in the context of the program historically. I think you have to do that, right? So he's bought himself more time. Having a rebuilding year, a down year, does not automatically disqualify you and say, hey, we got to move on. So he should be safe at the end of the year. I think that, and I also am just telling you that's what's going to happen. Also, because they're a young group and they've got a big-time recruit coming in this next year. So you keep your core together. You add a few pieces in the transfer portal, and you hope that's enough to get you back into postseason contention. My biggest concern at the moment, and I've said this multiple times in the pod, is if you're selling me on young guys being the key here when it comes to hope for the future, I haven't been super impressed with the development of some of those players. I think Jace Posey gives you good minutes, but it's not really translating to showing up in the stat sheet. Isaiah Manning has been better lately, but he struggled a lot. David Punch, I love what he brings to the table. You need to get him in the gym, shooting more jump shots this offseason. But that's something that you can do and you can figure out. Micah Robinson, I'd just like to see more of him on the floor. And, Vashawn Ouellette, I feel like he could be a really good leading scorer for you if he's surrounded by some distributors and also some scorers who can take some pressure off of him. But I don't have a feeling right now that you're going to be like right back where you were in the Mike Miles era next season. So I'm not sure what the plan is to improve. I think there's some concerning trends, though, with the way things are going and with just how much you've struggled to be competitive. Yeah, you've got some wins this year. The Kansas State win looks more impressive by the day because Jerome Tang seems to have figured some things out in the middle of the year. But everybody else that you've beaten, aside from K-State and Baylor, has been towards the bottom of the conference. And I guess West Virginia you could throw in that mix, too, as a team that, is hanging around 500. But no real impressive wins beside going on the road and beating Baylor. So that's not great news. On the women's side, they take down Texas Tech 63-42, pulled away in the second half. Your leading scorer was Aaliyah Robertson with 14 points. Sedona Prince had 9. Madison Connor had 13. Tough day for Haley Van Lith, only 6 points. Good day defensively, though, for the Frogs. Here's the thing for TCU. Also, by the way, Kansas State lost. So TCU, Kansas State, Baylor all tied for the top of the Big 12 Conference right now. And TCU's got the toughest games they got left on their schedule are West Virginia and Baylor. 2 ranked teams that they'll play late in the season. Baylor's the last game of the season. TCU's got to figure out, Kansas State did this, and Tech did it as well, not as effectively as K-State. But people are just pressuring them full court now. Kansas State did it. They were trapping, 70, 80 feet from the hoop. Texas Tech tried to replicate that. Mark Campbell's got to figure out a way to get that offense into half court and then get some rhythm going once they do. Because for these guards, especially Van Lith, who is, taking the lion's share, bringing the ball up the floor, I think she's just exhausted once she gets up the floor throughout the entirety of the game. So whether that's subbing more and getting more minutes for some guards who are currently on the bench to allow your starters to get some rest, or adjusting some of your inbounds, strategies so that you get down the floor easier, you got to make something happen here because it's becoming a problem on 2 games in a row now. That first half was pretty rough scoring the ball because they just couldn't find a way to figure out what Tech was doing, trapping them full court. And I expect, BYU, they play BYU Tuesday night, I believe. I assume they'll try to do the same thing. Now, again, it's going to vary game to game how effective it is because of the personnel. But bottom line is this is now a very clear strategy that people are going to use against you until you figure out how to address it. So that's the big challenge for Mark Campbell and his squad moving forward. When we come back, a quick recruiting note, also get some of your thoughts. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Coaching staff has been hard at work adding players for 2026 and very clear that they are making pass rushing a priority, right? Like they're getting edge rushers, getting defensive linemen who can make plays. The latest player, one of the latest players that committed, Amontre Harris, edge rusher from Summer Creek, Chad Woodfork's teammate, had a really good year last year. He committed last week. He's already decommitted. So not sure what happened here. I think part of it is when you're recruiting a lot of players at the same position, maybe he didn't realize at the time how many other edge rushers they were loading up on for 2026. Since it happened within the span of 1 week, I don't think this had anything to do with the coaching staff telling him, hey, we might be a little overbooked here. You may want to look elsewhere. I think it's simply he made a commitment and then he sort of had buyer's remorse about it a few days later and decided to do something else. So best of luck to him. What was your favorite moment in the Amontre Harris week-long commitment that he had to TCU? I hope it works out, whatever he decides to do. TCU obviously wasn't the right fit. He quickly decided he wanted to go elsewhere, and so we'll see where he lands. But it's hard to say whether it's a huge loss. You never want to lose somebody. I think Amontre Harris, watching his tape, is a good player. I'm not going to act like, oh, suddenly now that he's gone, we didn't want him anyway, right? But it happened so quickly that it's hard to really have much of an emotional response to it. It just sounds like he made a decision. After thinking about it, he said, you know what, I don't want to do that. And so he's moving on and at least opening up his recruitment elsewhere to see maybe what other options he'll have moving forward before his junior season starts. On Friday, I talked about Randy Clements joining the TCU coaching staff and becoming a part of what they're doing. Byron says, pancake everyone, run the dang ball. Heck yeah, man. If this offensive line can be more physical at the point of attack and become road graders in the run game, then the sky's the limit for this offense. I really feel that way. If you watched the Super Bowl last night, there's a lot of reasons that Philly wanted to blow out, but the biggest one in my mind, Eagles pass rush, right? Like they just harassed Mahomes from the jump. And they dominated the line of scrimmage. I said this a lot last year. There is no way to scheme around getting beat up front. It's just that's the fundamentals of football. In a lot of cases, the more physical team wins. And Philadelphia was definitely the more physical team in the trenches in that ball game. TCU has to become nastier, more physical, exert their will more on opponents this next season if they're going to be a true contender in the Big 12 championship race and potentially in the playoff. Off Track says, where's our big donor money? I'm not trying to be unappreciative, but we've got impeccable facilities. Thanks to donors, I'm not sure that's going to keep up with the new college makeup. And he talks about NIL and where they're at with that. So I think TCU is competitive in the NIL space. It appears that they have made a big effort and a big priority with their NIL funding to retain players. So to keep guys on the team that they like and that they feel like are going to be part of their future. I know this. My biggest gripe with the way they tried to build this team over the last few years is the lack of help on the O-line and D-line. In the portal, especially. Those players are expensive, man. It's very difficult to find those types of players in the portal. I've had a couple of parents of current TCU offensive and defensive linemen tell me that this offseason they've had a lot of opportunities to go elsewhere, and they've stayed put. But there is just a ton of competition for guys at those positions because it's so rare to find somebody who fits what you want to do and can compete at the Power 4 level. So that's the tough thing about the NIL space currently. I think TCU is doing what they can. We'll be back tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're knocking on 1,400 subscribers.